Chapter 36 of The People of the Mist by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. How Otter Came Back. After he had rested a while at the bottom of the glacier, Otter set to work to explore the cliff on the top of which he found himself, with the view of descending it and hiding at its foot till nightfall, when he hoped to find means of re-entering the city and putting himself in communication with Olfen. Very soon, however, he discovered that if he was to return at all, he must follow the same route by which he had come. Evidently the tunnel sloped upward very sharply, for he was standing on the brow of a precipice cut into three slopes, which, taken together, may have measured some 300 feet in height, and so far as he could see, it was utterly impossible to descend any of these cliffs without the aid of ropes, nor could he continue his investigations over a wide area, for about 400 paces to the left of the opening to the subterranean passage, whereof, by the way, he was very careful to note the exact position, the mountain pushed out a snowy shoulder, with declivities so precipitous that he dared not trust himself on them. Then he tried the right-hand side, but with no better luck, for here he was stopped by a yawning rift in the rock. Now Otter sat down and considered the situation. The day was still young, and he knew that it would be foolish to attempt escape from the pool before dark. In front of him the mountain rose steeply till, so far as he could judge, it reached the pass, which lay some 2 miles off, at the base of that main peak, on whose snows the priest had watched the breaking of the dawn. Part of this declivity was covered with blocks of green ice, but here and there appeared patches of earth, on which grew stunted trees, shrubs, and even grass and flowers. Being very hungry, it occurred to Otter that he might find edible roots among this scanty vegetation. With this hope he began to climb the slope, to be rewarded in due course by the discovery of a vegetable that he recognized, for it was the same which had been offered to him on the occasion of his unlucky outbreak that had resulted in the casting away of the rubies. With this poor food the dwarf filled himself, and having found a bough that made him an excellent staff, he continued his climb, desiring to see what there might be on the other side of the neck. Arriving there without any great difficulty, Otter stood astonished. Although he was not much given to the study of scenery, below him lay the city of the mist, with its shining belt of rivers that, fed from the inexhaustible mountain snows, meandered across the vast plains, now no longer hidden in mist, which they had trodden on their journey. Above his head the mighty peak towered thousands of feet into the air, till it ended in a summit shaped like a human finger pointing eternally to the heavens. Before him the scene was even stranger, made up as it was of snowy fields broken by ridges of black rock and laid one beneath the other like white sails drying upon the slopes of a sand-hill. Gradually, as the eye travelled downward, these snow fields grew fewer and fewer, till at last they vanished altogether, and their place was taken first by stretches of grassland, and finally, at the foot of the mountain, but what seemed to be a rich and level country, interspersed with clumps of bush and forest trees. The first of these patches of snow lay within 5 furlongs of where the dwarf stood, but several hundred feet below him. Between the neck of the pass and the snow stretched a mighty rift or chasm, with sides so sheer that no goat could have kept a footing on them. Yet this gulf was not without its bridge, for a rock wall rose from the bottom of the chasm, forming the bed of a glacier which spanned it from side to side. In some places the wall was comparatively level, and in others it showed descents sharp as those of a waterfall. This remarkable bridge of ice, that varied from 100 paces to a few yards in width, was bordered on either side by the most fearful precipices, while, just where its fall was sheerest and its width narrowest, it seemed to spring across a space of nothingness, like the arch of a bridge thrown from bank to bank of a river. Indeed, at this point its line became so attenuated that in the glittering sunlight Otter was doubtful whether it was not broken through for a distance of some yards. Being of an inquiring mind, the dwarf decided to satisfy himself upon the matter. All around him lay slabs of rock, some of which were worn perfectly smooth and to the thinness of a tombstone, by centuries of polishing in the iron jaws of glaciers. Selecting one of these of convenient size, Otter approached the edge of the bridge, pushing the stone before him over the frozen snow. Here the ice was perfect, except for a slight hoar frost that covered it, for the action of the wind prevented the snow from gathering on the bridge, and whenever the sun was strong enough to melt its surface, it froze again at night, so that no slide upon a parish pond could have been more slippery or free from inequalities. Otter gave his stone a push, and away it went, sometimes swiftly and sometimes at a trifling speed, according to the nature of the angle down which it passed, leaving a bright green ribbon upon the ice in its wake, whence it swept the hoar-frost as it sped. Once or twice he thought that it was going to stop, but it never did stop. At length it approached the steepest and narrowest part of the descent, down which the stone rushed with fearful velocity. "Now I shall see whether the bridge is broken," thought Otter, and just then the rock, travelling like an arrow, came to that portion of the glacier where, for a width difficult to estimate, it stretched unsupported over space and measured only some feet across. On it flew, then seemed to leap into the air, and once more sped forward till it reached the further slope of snow, up which it travelled for a distance and stopped, appearing, even to Otter's keen sight, no larger than a midge upon a tablecloth. "Now if a man had been seated on that stone, he might have passed this bridge in safety," said Otter to himself, "yet it is one that few would care to travel, unless sure death were behind him." Then he determined on a second trial, and selecting another and somewhat lighter stone, he sent it upon its journey. It followed precisely the same course as its predecessor, but when it came to the knife blade of the bridge it vanished. "I am sorry for that stone," thought Otter, "for doubtless it, that has been whole for many years, is at this moment only little pieces." A third time he repeated his experiment, choosing the heaviest rock that he could move. This messenger also leaped into the air at the narrowest portion of the bridge, then passed on in safety to the slope of snow beyond. "A strange place," thought Otter, "and I pray that it may never be my lot to ride one of those stone horses." Then he turned down the mountain again, for the afternoon was advancing. When he reached the entrance to the river bed, sunset was at hand. For a while he sat watching the fading light and eating some more roots which he had gathered. Now he crawled into the passage and commenced his darksome journey towards the home of the dead water dweller, though what he was to do when he got there he did not know. No accident befell him, and in due course he arrived safely in the den, his journey being much facilitated by the staff he bore, which enabled him to feel his way like a blind man. Creeping to the edge of the pool, he listened to its turmoil, for the shadows were gathering so fast, with some ghost-like shapes of foam excepted, he could not even see the surface of the water. "If I go in there now, how can I get out again?" Otter thought sadly. After all, perhaps I should have done better to return while it was still light, for then by the help of my staff and the rope I might have made shift to climb the overhanging ledge of rock, but to try this now were madness. "I will go back and sit in the cave with the ghosts of the god, and his dead till morning comes again, though I do not crave their company." So he retreated a few paces and sat in silence near the tail of the dead crocodile. After a while a loneliness took hold of him. He tried to sleep and could not, for it seemed to Otter that he saw eyes staring at him from the depths of the cave, and heard dead men whispering to each other tales of their dreadful ends. Moment by moment his fears grew upon him, for Otter was very superstitious. Now he fancied that he could distinguish the head of the reptile limned in fire and resting on the edge of the rock as he had seen it that morning. Doubtless, he thought, this monster is a devil and has come to life again to be revenged upon me. Wow, I liked him better when he was in the flesh than now that he has turned himself to fire. Then to comfort himself he began to talk aloud, saying: "Otter, unlucky that you are, why did you not die at once instead of living on to be tormented by ghosts? Perhaps your master the boss, whom alone you love, is dead already and waits for you to come to serve him. You are very tired. Say now, Otter, would it not be well if you took that rope which is about your middle and hanged yourself? Thus you too would become a ghost and be able to do battle with them in their own fashion." And he groaned loudly. Then of a sudden he grew fearful indeed. The short wool stood upon his head, his teeth chattered, and as he said afterwards, his very nose seemed to grow cold with terror. For as he sat he heard, or seemed to hear, a voice speaking to him from the air, and that voice his master's. "Otter, Otter," said the voice. He made no answer, he was too frightened. "Otter, is that you?" whispered the voice again. Then he spoke. "Yes, Baas, it is I. I know that you are dead and call me. Give me 1 minute till I can undo my rope, and I will kill myself and come to you." "Thank you, Otter," said the voice, with a ghastly attempt at a laugh. "But if it is all the same, I would much rather that you came alive." "Yes, Baas, and I too would rather stop alive. But being alive, how can I join you who are dead?" "You fool, I am not dead," said Leonard. "Then, Baas, how is it that you speak out of the air? Come near to me, that I may touch you and be comforted." "I cannot, Otter. I am bound and in a prison above you. There is a hole in the floor, and if you have a rope, as I heard you say, perhaps you could climb up to me." Now the dwarf began to understand. Rising, he stretched the long staff he had brought with him high above his head, and found to his delight that he could touch the roof of the cave. Presently the point of the staff ceased to press upon the rock. "Is the place here, Baas?" said Otter. "It is here, but you must throw the stick up like a spear through the hole, for I am tied and cannot put out my hand to take it." "Stay a while, Baas. First I must make the line fast to it." "Good, but be swift, for I am in danger." Hurriedly Otter undid the rope from about his middle, knotting it securely to the centre of the stick. Then some 5 feet below the stick he made a loop large enough for a man to place his foot in, and having ascertained the exact situation of the opening in the roof of the cave, he hurled the staff upwards and jerked at the line. "It is fixed," whispered Leonard from above. "Now come up if you can." The dwarf required no second invitation. Seizing the rope as high as he could reach above his head, he began to drag himself up hand over hand. No easy task, for the hide cord was thin, and cut his fingers and his right leg, round which he had twisted it to get a better purchase. Presently, however, he succeeded in setting his foot in the loop he had prepared, when he found that his head and shoulders were in the hole, and that by reaching upwards he could grasp the staff which lay across it. The rest was easy. Within half a minute he lay gasping at his master's side. "Have you a knife, Otter?" "Yes, Baas, my small one. The big ones are down there. I will tell you that story by and by." "Never mind the story now, Otter. My hands are tied behind my back. Feel for the lashings and cut them. Then give me the knife that I may free my legs." Otter obeyed, and presently Leonard rose and stretched himself with a sigh of relief. "Where's the shepherdess, Baas?" "There in the next cell. They separated me from her, and since then I have been dangled by the legs over that hole, bound and gagged, I think in order to persuade her to consent to something or other by the sight of my danger, for doubtless she was placed where she could see all. Then they left me, and I managed to spit out the gag, but I could not undo the cords. I expect that they will soon be back again." "Then had we better not fly, Baas? I have found a passage that leads to the mountains." "How can we fly and leave the shepherdess, Otter? Since I have been held down the hole, only 2 men have visited me from time to time, for they think me helpless. Let us seize these men when they come in, and take their knives, for we are unarmed. Then we can think. Also, we shall have their keys." "Yes, Baas, we may do that. You take the staff, it is stout." "And what will you use?" asked Leonard. "Fear not, Baas. Do these men bear lights?" "Yes." "Then in 2 minutes I will make me a weapon." And untying the hide rope from the stick, he began to fumble with it busily. "Now I'm ready, Baas," he said presently. "Where shall we stand?" "Here," answered Leonard, leading him to the door. "We will crouch in the shadow, one on either side of this door, and when the priests have entered and closed it, and begin to look round for me, then we can spring upon them. Only, Otter, there must be no bungling and no noise." "I think that there will be none, Baas. They will be too frightened to cry at first, and after that they will become dumb." "Otter," whispered Leonard, as they stood in the dark, "did you kill the water dweller?" "Yes, yes, Baas," he chuckled in answer. "I caught him with the hook that I made ready, but he did not die easily, Baas, and if I had not been able to swim well, he would have drowned me." "I heard something of it from Nam," said Leonard. "You are a wonderful fellow, Otter." "Oh, Baas, it was no valour of mine. When I saw his eyes I was horribly afraid, only I thought how gladly you would have attacked him had you been there, and what a coward you would hold me could you have seen me shivering like a girl before a big lizard, and these thoughts gave me courage." "Oh, that is all very well," replied Leonard, and suddenly added, "Hush, be ready." As he spoke the door opened, and 2 great priests came through it, one of them bearing a candle. He who bore the light turned to shut the door, for he suspected nothing. Then at one and the same instant Leonard, emerging from the shadow, dealt the first priest a blow upon the head with his staff, which stunned if did not kill him, for he fell like an ox beneath the pole-axe, while Otter, standing where he was, dexterously cast his hide rope about the throat of the second man, and drew the noose tight with a jerk that brought him to the earth. In 20 seconds it was all over. The men, who were the same that had held Leonard suspended in the oubliette, lay senseless or dead, and the dwarf and his master were engaged in possessing themselves of their knives and keys by the light of the candle, which, though it had fallen to the ground, fortunately remained burning. "That was well done, Otter," said Leonard, "and I am not ashamed to have done it, for these devils kicked me when I was bound. Now we are armed and have the keys. What next?" Just then Otter sprang to his feet, crying, "Look out, Baas, here are more." Leonard glanced up to see, and behold, the second door in the cell was opened, and through it came Juanna, Olfan, Nam, Soa, and 3 other men. For a moment there was silence, till one of the captains cried out, "See, Jâl, the god has come back, and already he claims his victims," and he pointed to the 2 priests. Then followed a scene of confusion, for even Olfan and Nam were amazed at what seemed to them little short of a miracle, while Leonard and Juanna had eyes for each other only, and the three captains stared at Otter like men who think they see a ghost. But one person in that company kept her head, and that person was Soa. The captain who guarded her had loosened his hold. Silently she slunk back into the shadows, and unseen of any, vanished through the doorway by which she had been led in. A minute passed, and Otter, thinking that he heard a noise without that door of the cell whereby the two priests had entered, which had been left ajar, went to it and tried to open it. Just then also Olfan missed Soa. "Where is the woman, Nam's daughter?" he cried. "It seems that she has escaped and shut us in, King," answered Otter calmly. Followed by the others, Olfan sprang first to the door of the cell where they were, and then through the connecting passage to that of Juanna's prison. It was true, both were closed. "It matters nothing, here are the keys," said Leonard. "They will not avail us, Deliverer," answered Olfan, "for these doors are made fast without by bars of stone thicker than my arm. Now this woman has gone to rouse the college of the priests, who will presently come to kill us like caged rats." "Quick," said Leonard, "waste no time. We must break down the doors." "Yes, Deliverer," said Nam mockingly, "batter them in with your fists, cut through the stonework with your spear. Surely they are as nothing to your strength." End of chapter 36. Of the People of the Mist by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. I am repaid, Queen. Their position was terrible. Soa had escaped, and Soa knew everything. Moreover, she was mad with hatred and longing for revenge on Leonard, Otter, and in a less degree on Olfan the king. Had they succeeded in revealing themselves to the people, all might have gone well, for Otter and Juanna could certainly have been accepted as true gods, who had passed and repassed the gates of death scatheless. But now the affair was different. Soa would tell the truth to the priests who, even if they were inclined to desert her father in his extremity, must strike for their own sakes and for that of their order, which was the most powerful among the people of the Mist, and had no desire to be placed under the yoke of secular authority. It was clear to all of them that if they could not escape, they must fall very shortly into the hands of the priests, who, knowing everything, would not dare to allow them to appeal to the army or to the superstition of the outside public. The only good card they had was the possession of the person of Nam, though it remained to be seen how far this would help them. To begin with, there was always some ready to step into the shoes of a high priest, and also Nam had blundered so extensively in the matter of the false gods that the greater part of the fraternity whom he had involved in his mistakes would not sorrow to see the last of him. These facts, which were perfectly well known to Olfan and guessed at by his companions, sharpened their sense of danger in which they had been placed by Soa's resource and cunning. Indeed, their escape was a matter of life and death to them and to many hundreds of their adherents. If once they could reach the temple and proclaim the re-arisen gods to the people, all would go well, for the army would suffice to keep the priests from using violence. But if they failed in this, their death warrant was already signed, for none of them would ever be heard of again. No wonder then that they hurled themselves despairingly upon the stubborn doors. For an hour or more they laboured, but all in vain. The massive timbers of hardwood, 6 inches or more in thickness, could scarcely be touched by their knives and spears, nor might their united strength serve even to stir the stone bolts and bars that held them fast, and they had nothing that could be used as a battering ram. "It is useless," said Leonard at last, throwing down his knife in despair. This wood is like iron. It would take us a week to cut through it." "Why not try fire, Boss?" suggested Otter. Accordingly, they attempted to burn down the doors, with the result that they nearly stifled themselves in the smoke and made little impression upon the woodwork. At length they gave up the experiment. It was a failure, and sat looking blankly at each other as they listened to certain sounds which reached them from the passage without, telling them that their enemies were gathering there. "Has any one a suggestion to make?" said Leonard at last. "If not, I think that this game is about played." "Boss," answered Otter, "I have a word to say. We can all go down through the hole by which I came up to you. The water dweller is dead. I slew him with my own hand, so there is nothing to fear from him. Beneath the hole runs a tunnel, and that tunnel leads to the slope of the mountain above. At the top of this slope is an ice bridge by which men may reach a fair country if they have a mind to." "Then for heaven's sake let us cross it," put in Juanna. "I have seen that bridge," said Olfan, while the captain stared wonderingly at the man whose might had prevailed against the ancient snake, "but never yet have I heard of a traveller who dared set his foot upon it." "It is dangerous, but it can be crossed," replied Otter. "At least it is better to try it than to stay here to be murdered by these medicine men." "I think that we will go, Leonard," said Juanna. "If I am to die, I wish to do so in the open air. Only what is to become of Nam? And perhaps Olfan and the captains would prefer to stop here." "Nam will go with us wherever we go," answered Leonard grimly. "We have a long score to settle with that gentleman. As for Olfan and his captains, they must please themselves." "What will you do, Olfan?" asked Juanna, speaking to him for the first time since the scene in the other prison. "It seems, Queen," he answered with downcast eyes, "that I have sworn to defend you to the last, and this I will do the more readily because now my life is of little value. As for my brethren here, I think, like you, that they will choose to die in the open rather than wait to be murdered by the priests." The three captains nodded an assent to his words. Then they all set to work. First they took food and drink, of which there was an ample supply in the other cell, and hurriedly swallowing some of it, disposed the rest about their persons as best they could, for they foresaw that even if they succeeded in escaping, it was likely that they would go hungry for many days. Then Leonard wrapped Juanna in a goatskin cloak which he took from one of the fallen priests, placing the second cloak over his own shoulders, for he knew that it would be bitterly cold on the mountains. Lastly, they tied Nam's arms behind him and deprived him of his knife, so that the old man might work none of them a sudden injury in his rage. All being prepared, Otter made his rope fast to the staff and descended rapidly to the cave below. As his feet touched the ground, the priests began to batter upon the doors of the cell with beams of wood or some such heavy instruments. "Quick, Juanna," said Leonard, "sit in this noose and hold the line. We will let you down. Hurry, those doors cannot stand for long." Another minute and she was beside Otter, who stood beneath, a candle in his hand. Then Leonard came down. "By the way, Otter," he said, "have you seen anything of the jewels that are supposed to be here?" "There is a bag yonder by the water dweller's bed, Boss," answered the dwarf carelessly, "but I did not trouble to look into it. What is the use of the red stones to us now?" "None, but they may be of use afterwards if we get away." "Yes, Boss, if we get away," answered Otter, bethinking himself of the ice bridge. "We can pick it up as we go along." Just then Nam arrived, having been let down by Olfan and the captains, and stood glaring round him, not without awe, for neither he nor any of his brethren had ever dared to visit the sacred home of the snake god. Then the captains descended, and last of all came Olfan. "We have little time to spare, Deliverer," said the king. "The door is falling," and as he spoke they heard a great crash above. Otter jerked furiously at the rope, till by good luck one end of the stake slid over the edge of the hole and it fell among them. "No need to leave this line for them to follow by," he said. "Besides, it may be useful." At that moment something appeared looking through the hole. It was the head of one of the pursuing priests. Nam saw it and took his opportunity. "The false gods escaped by the tunnel to the mountains," he screamed, "and with them the false king. Follow and fear not. The water dweller is dead. Think not of me, Nam, but slay them." With an exclamation Otter struck him heavily across the mouth, knocking him backwards, but the mischief was done, for a voice cried in answer, "We hear you, father, and will find ropes and follow." Then they started. One moment they paused to look at the huge bulk of the dead crocodile. "The dwarf is a god in truth," cried one of the captains, "for no man could have wrought such a deed." "Forward," said Leonard, "we have no time to lose." Now they were by the crocodile's bed among the broken bones of his victims. "The bag, Otter, where's the bag?" asked Leonard. "Here, Baas," answered the dwarf, dragging it from under the mouldering skeleton of the unlucky priest who, having offended the new found god, had been let down through the hole to lay it in its hiding place and to perish in the jaws of the water dweller. Leonard took the bag and opening its mouth, which was drawn tight with a running strip of hide, he peeped into it, while Otter held down the candle that he might see. From its depth came a glimmer of red and blue light that glowed like the heart of some dull fire. "It is the treasure," he said, in a low tone of exultation. "At last the luck has turned." "How much does it weigh?" said Juanna, as they sped onwards. 7 or 8 pounds, I should say," he answered, still exultantly. 7 or 8 solid pounds of gems, the finest in the world. "Then give it to me," she said. "I have nothing else to carry. You may have to use both of your hands presently." "True," he answered, and passed the string of the bag over her head. Now they went on up the smooth sloping bed of the stream, suffering little inconvenience except from the cold of the water that flowed about their ankles. "The stream has risen a little, Baas, since I passed it this morning," said Otter. "Doubtless the day's sun has melted some snow at its source. Tomorrow we might not have been able to travel this road." "Very likely," answered Leonard. "I told you that our luck has turned at last." 20 minutes more and they reached the mouth of the tunnel, and passing between the blocks of ice, found themselves upon the mountain side. But as it chanced, the face of the moon was hidden by clouds, which is often the case in this country at the beginning of the spring season, for whereas in winter the days are almost invariably misty and the nights clear, in the spring and summer these atmospheric conditions are frequently reversed. So dark was it indeed that it proved impossible to attempt the ascent of the mountain until the day broke, since to do so would be to run the risk of losing themselves and very possibly breaking their necks among its numerous clefts and precipices. After a minute's hasty discussion, they set to work to fill up the mouth of the tunnel, or rather the cracks between the blocks of ice that already encumbered it, with such materials laid to hand, namely, lumps of frozen snow, gravel, and a few large stones which they were fortunate enough to find in the immediate vicinity, for the darkness rendered it impossible to search for these at a distance. While they were thus engaged, they heard the voices of the priests speaking on the further side of their somewhat inefficient barrier, and worked harder than ever, thinking that the moment of attack had come. To their astonishment, however, the sound of talking died away. "Now where have they gone?" said Leonard. "To climb the cliff by another path and cut us off?" "I think not, Deliverer," answered Olfan, "for I know of no such path. I think that they have gone to bring heavy beams by means of which they will batter down the ice wall." "Still there is such a path, King," said one of the captains, "for I myself have often climbed it when I was young, searching for snow flowers to bring to her whom I courted in those days." "Can you find it now, friend?" asked Olfan eagerly. "I do not forget a road that I have trod," said the captain, "but it is one not easy to follow." "See now, Shepherdess," said Olfan, after thinking a while, "shall we take this man for a guide and return down the cliff to the city? For there, unless fate is against us, we may find friends among the soldiers and fight out this battle with the priests." "No, no," answered Juanna, almost passionately. "I would rather die than go back to that dreadful place to be murdered at last. Do you go if you will, Olfan, and leave us to take our chance." "That I cannot do, Queen, for I am sworn to a certain service," he said proudly. "But hearken, my friend, follow this path of which you speak, if you can do so in the darkness and find help. Then return swiftly to this spot, where I and your two comrades will hold the priests at bay. Perchance you will not find us living, but this I charge you: if we are dead, give it out that the gods have left the land because they were so evilly dealt with, and rouse up the people to fall upon the priests and make an end of them once and for ever, for thus only shall they win peace and safety." Making no reply, the man shook Olfan and the other two captains by the hand, saluted Juanna, and vanished into the dark. Then they all sat down in front of the mouth of the tunnel to wait and watch, and very glad were they of the goatskin cloaks which had belonged to the priests, for as the night drew towards the dawn, the cold became so bitter that they could scarcely bear it, but were obliged to rise and stamp to and fro to keep their wet feet from freezing. "Leonard," said Juanna, "you do not know what passed after Nam trapped you," and she told him all the tale. When she had finished, he rose, and taking Olfan by the hand, said, "King, I thank you. May fortune deal as well with you as you have dealt by me and mine." "Say no more, Deliverer," answered Olfan hastily. "I have but done my duty and fulfilled my oath, though at times the path of duty is hard for a man to follow." And he looked toward Juanna and sighed. Leonard sat down and was silent. But many a time, both then and in after days, did he wonder at the nobleness of mind of this savage king, which enabled him, under circumstances so cruel, to conquer his own passion and show himself willing to lay down his life and throne together, that he might carry out his vow to protect the woman who had brought him so much pain and now left him for ever with his successful rival. At length, looking at the mountain peak above them, they saw its snows begin to blush red with the coming of the dawn, and just then also they heard many voices talking within the tunnel, and caught glimpses of light flashing through the openings in their rude fortifications. The priests, who no doubt had been delayed by the procuring of the timbers which were to serve as battering rams, and the labour necessary to drag them up the steep incline of the tunnel, had returned and in force. A few more minutes and a succession of dull thuds on the farther side of the ice wall told the little band of defenders that their enemies were at work. "The light grows quickly, Deliverer," said Olfan quietly. "I think that now you may begin to ascend the mountain and take no harm." "What shall we do with this man?" asked Leonard, pointing to Nam. "Kill him," said Otter. "No, not yet awhile," answered Olfan. "Take this," and he handed Leonard the spear of the third captain, who had left it when he started down the mountain, fearing that it might encumber him, "and drive him along with you at its point. Should we be overpowered, you may buy your lives as the price of his. But should we hold them back and you escape, then do with him what you will." "I know well what I would do with him," muttered Otter, glowering at the priest. "And now farewell," went on Olfan in the same calm voice. "Bring more ice, comrades, or stone if you see any." The walls cracked. Leonard and Otter wrung the king's hand in silence, but Juanna could not leave him thus, for her heart was melted at the thought of all his goodness. "Forgive me," she murmured, "that I have brought you grief, and, as I fear, death to follow grief." "The grief you could not help, Queen, and be sure I shall welcome death if he should choose me. Go now, and happiness go with you. May you escape in safety and with the bright pebbles which you desire. May you and your husband, the Deliverer, be blessed for many years in each other's love, and when you grow old together from time to time, think kindly of that wild man who worshipped you while you were young and laid down his life to save you." Juanna listened, and tears sprang to her eyes. Then of a sudden she seized the great man's hand and kissed it. "I am repaid, Queen," he said, "and perchance your husband will not be jealous. Now go, and swiftly." As he spoke, a small portion of the wall fell outwards, and the fierce face of a priest appeared at the opening. With a shout, Olfan lifted his broad spear and thrust. The priest fell backwards, and just then the captains arrived with stones and stopped the hole. Then the three turned and fled up the mountainside, Otter driving Nam before him with blows and curses, till at length the old man fell and lay on his face groaning. Nor could the dwarf's blows, which were not of the softest, force him to rise. "Get up, you treacherous dog," said Leonard, threatening him with the spear. "Then you must loose my arms, Deliverer," answered the priest. "I am very weak, and I cannot travel up this mountain with my hands bound behind me. Surely you have nothing to fear from one aged and unarmed man." "Not much at present, I suppose," muttered Leonard, "though we have had enough to fear from you in the past," and taking his knife he cut loose the lashings. While he did so Juanna turned and looked behind her. Far below them she could see the forms of Olfan and his companions standing shoulder to shoulder, and even catch the gleam of light reflected from their spears, for now the sun was rising. Beneath them again she saw the grass-grown roofs of that earthly hell, the city of the People of the Mist, and the endless plain beyond, through which the river wandered like a silver serpent. There also was the further portion of the huge wall of the temple, built by unknown hands in forgotten years, and rising above the edge of that gap in the cliff through which she was looking, appeared a black mass which she knew to be the head and shoulders of the hideous Colossus, on whose dizzy brow she had sat in that strange hour when the shouting thousands thundered a welcome to her as their goddess, and whence her most beloved friend Francisco had been hurled to his cruel death. "Oh, what I have suffered in that place," she thought to herself. "How have I lived through it, I wonder? And yet I have won something," and she glanced at Leonard, who was driving Nam towards her. "And if only we survive, and I am the means of enabling him to fulfil his vow and buy back his home with these jewels, I shall not regret all that I have endured to win them. Yes, even when he is no longer so very much in love, he must always be grateful to me, for few women would have done as much for their husbands." Then Nam staggered past, hissing curses, while the untiring Otter rained blows upon his back, and losing sight of Olfan and his companions, they went on in safety till they reached the neck and saw the ice bridge glittering before them and the wide fields of snow beyond. End of chapter 37. Of the People of the Mist by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Triumph of Nam. "Which way are we to go now?" said Juanna. "Must we climb down this great gulf?" "No, Shepherdess," answered Otter. See, before you is a bridge," and he pointed to the band of ice and rock which traversed the wide ravine. "A bridge?" gasped Juanna. "Why, it is as slippery as a slide and steep as the side of a house. A fly could not keep its footing on it." "Look here, Otter," put in Leonard, "either you are joking or you are mad. How can we cross that place? We should be dashed to pieces before we had gone 10 yards." "Thus, Baas, we must sit each of us on one of the flat stones that lie round here. Then the stone will take us across of itself. I know, for I have tried it." "Do you mean to tell me that you have been over there on a rock?" "No, Baas, but I have sent 3 stones over. 2 crossed safely. I watched them go the whole way, and one vanished in the middle. I think that there is a hole there, but we must risk that. If the stone is heavy enough it will jump it. If not, then we shall go down the hole and be no more troubled." "Great heavens!" said Leonard, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "This is practical tobogganing with a vengeance. Is there no other way?" "I can see none, Baas, except for the birds, and I think that we had better stop talking and make ready, for the priests are still behind us. If you will watch on the neck here so that we are not surprised, I will seek stones to carry us." "How about this man?" said Leonard, pointing to Nam, who lay face downwards on the snow, apparently in a dead faint. "Oh, we must keep him a while, Baas. He may be useful if those priests come. If not, I will talk with him before we start. He is asleep and cannot run away." Then Leonard went to the top of the neck, which was distant some 20 yards, and Otter began to search for stones suitable to his purpose. As for Juanna, she turned her back to the ice bridge, at which she scarcely dared to look, and sat herself upon a rock. In doing so, the jewels in the bag struck against her knee and jingled, and the thought came into her mind that she would examine them while she waited, partly because she desired to distract her thoughts from the vision of this new and terrible ordeal which lay before her, and partly to gratify a not unnatural curiosity. Opening the mouth of the bag, she thrust her fingers into it, and one by one drew out the biggest gems which were jumbled together there, placing them on the rock beside her. In less than a minute she was feasting her eyes upon such a collection of priceless jewels as had never before gladdened the sight of any white woman, even in her wildest dreams. Indeed, till now Juanna had not thought it possible that stones so splendid could exist on the hither side of the walls of heaven. First there were great sapphires, roughly squared, and 2 enormous round star rubies. These had formed the eyes of the colossus, which were removed on the morrow of their arrival, the star rubies representing the blood-red pupils. Then there was a heart-shaped ruby of perfect colour and without flaw, almost as large as a jackdaw's egg, which on the days of sacrifice had adorned the breast of the chief priests of the people of the Mist for many generations. Next came the greatest wonders of this treasure, 2 marvellous stones, one a sapphire and one a ruby, fashioned respectively into models of the statue of the dwarf and of the hideous shape of the water dweller. Then there were others, dozens of them, some rudely cut and polished, and some as they came from the earth, but every one of them singled out for its remarkable size and flawlessness, or its perfect fire and beauty. Juanna arranged them in rows and stared at them with ecstasy. Where is the woman who would not have done so? Till in contemplating them she even forgot the present terrors of her position, forgot everything except the gorgeous loveliness and infinite value of the wealth of gems, which she had been the means of winning for Leonard. Among other things that passed from her mind at this moment was the presence of Nam, who, overcome by rage and exhaustion, lay in a seeming faint upon the snow within 12 paces of her. She never saw him lift his head and look at her with an expression as cold and cruel as that which Otter had seen in the eyes of the water dweller when he lifted his head from its bed of rock. She never saw him roll slowly over and over across the snow towards her, pausing a while between each turn of his body, for now she was occupied in replacing the jewels one by one into their bag of leather. At last all were in, and with a sigh, for it was sad to lose sight of objects so beautiful, Juanna drew the mouth of the bag tight and prepared to place it round her neck. At this moment it was that a hand, withered and lean with age, passed beneath her eyes, and swiftly as the snatch of an eagle's talon seized the bag and rent it from her grasp. She sprang up with a cry of dismay, and well might she be dismayed, for there, running from her with incredible speed, was Nam, the jewels in his hand. Otter and Leonard heard her cry, and thinking that the priest was escaping, sped to cut him off. But he had no idea of escape, at least not of such an escape as they expected. Some 40 yards from where Juanna had been sitting, a little promontory of rock jutted out over the unclimbable gulf below them, and towards this spot Nam directed his steps. Running along the ridge, he halted at its end. Indeed he must do, unless he would fall 1,000 feet or more to the bottom of the ravine beneath. Then he turned and faced his pursuers, who by now had reached the edge of the cliff. "Come one step nearer," he cried, "and I will let this bag fall whence you shall never recover it, for no foot can tread those walls of rock, and there is water at the bottom of the gulf." Leonard and Otter stopped, trembling for the fate of the jewels. "Listen, Deliverer," cried Nam. "You came to this land to seek these trinkets, is it not so? And now you have found them, and would be gone with them. Before you go you wish to kill me for vengeance sake, because I have shown you to be cheats, and have sought to offer you up to those gods whom you have blasphemed. But the red stones you desire are in my hands, and if I unclasp my fingers they will be lost to you and all the world for ever. Say now, if I bring them back to you in safety, will you swear to give me my life and suffer me to go my ways in peace?" "Yes, we will swear it," answered Leonard, who could not conceal the anguish of his anxiety. "Come back, Nam, and you shall depart unharmed, but if you let the stones fall, then you shall follow them." "You swear it," said the priest contemptuously. "You are come to this, that you will sacrifice your revenge to satisfy your greed? O white man with a noble heart, now I will outdo you, for I, who am not noble, will sacrifice my life to disappoint you of your desires. What? Shall the ancient holy treasure of the people of the mist be stolen by 2 white thieves and their black hound? Never. I would have killed you all had time been granted to me, but in that I failed, and I am glad that I have failed, for now I will deal you a bitterer blow than any death. May the curse of Jâl and Aca cleave to you, you dogs without a kennel. May you live outcasts and die in the dirt, and may your fathers and your mothers and your children spit upon your bones as I do. Farewell." And shaking his disengaged hand at them, he spat toward them. Then, with a sudden motion, Nam hurled himself backward off the point of the rock and vanished into space, bearing the treasure with him. For a while the three stood aghast and stared at each other and the point of rock which had been occupied by the venerable form of the late high priest. Then Juanna sank down upon the snow sobbing. "It is my fault," she wailed, "all my fault. Just now I was boasting to myself that I had won a wealth for you, and I have lost everything, and we have suffered for nothing, and Leonard, you are a beggar. Oh, it is too much, too much." "Go out there, Otter," said Leonard in a hoarse voice, pointing to the place where Nam had hurled himself, "and see whether there is any chance of our being able to climb down into the gulf." The dwarf obeyed, and presently returned, shaking his head. "It is impossible, Baas," he said. "The walls of rock are sheer, as though they had been cut with a knife. Moreover, there is water at the bottom of them, as the old wizard said, for I can hear the sound of it. Oh, Baas, Baas, why did you not kill him at first, or let me kill him afterwards? Surely I told you that he would bring evil on us. Well, they are gone, and we can never find them again. So let us save our lives if we may, for after all these are more to us than bright stones. Come now and help me, Baas, for I have found 2 flat rocks that will serve our turn, a big one for you and the shepherdess, since doubtless she will fear to make the journey alone, and a smaller one for myself." Leonard followed him without a word. He was too heartbroken to speak, while Juanna rose and returned to the spot where Nam had robbed her. Looking up presently, her eyes still blurred with tears, she saw Leonard and the dwarf laboriously pushing 2 heavy stones across the snow towards her. "Come, do not cry, Juanna," said Leonard, ceasing from his labours and laying his hand kindly upon her shoulder. "They are gone, and there is an end to it. Now we must think of other things." "Oh," she answered, "if only you had seen them, you would never stop crying all your life." "Then I dare say that the fit will be a short one," replied Leonard grimly, glancing at the awful bridge which stretched between them and safety. "Listen, Juanna, you and I must lie upon this stone, and it will, so says Otter, carry us across to the other side of the ravine." I cannot," she gasped. "I shall faint and fall off. I am sure that I shall." "But you must, Juanna," answered Leonard. "At least you must choose between this and returning to the City of the Mist." "I will come," she said. "I know that I shall be killed, but it is better than going back to those horrible priests, and besides, it does not matter now that I have lost the jewels." "Jewels are not everything, Juanna." "Listen, shepherdess," put in Otter. "The thing is easy, though it looks difficult. All that you have to do is shut your eyes and lie still, then the stone will carry you over. I am not afraid. I will go first to show you the way, and where a black dwarf can pass, there you white people who are so much braver can follow. But before I start, I will tie you and the Deliverer together with my cord, so that you will feel safer." Then Otter dragged both stones to the very verge of the incline, and having passed the rope about the waists of Juanna and Leonard, he prepared himself for the journey. "Now, Deliverer," he said, "when I am safe across, all that you must do is to lie flat upon the stone, both of you, and push a little with the spear. Then, before you know it, you will be on my side." "All right," said Leonard doubtfully. "Well, I suppose that you had better start. Waiting won't make the matter any easier." "Yes, Baas, I will go now. Ah, little did I think that I should ever be forced to take such a ride as this. Well, it will be something to make songs about afterwards." And Otter laid himself face downwards on the stone with a little laugh, though Leonard noticed that, however brave his spirit might be, he could not prevent his flesh from revealing its natural weakness, for it quivered pitifully. "Now, Baas," he said, gripping the edges of the stone with his large hands, "when I give the word, do you push gently, and then you will see how a blackbird can fly. Put your head lower, Baas." Leonard obeyed, and the dwarf whispered in his ear, "I only want to say, Baas, in case we should not meet again, for accidents will happen even on the safest roads, that I am sorry that I made such a pig of myself yonder. It was so dull down there in that hole of a palace, and the fog made me see all things wrong. Moreover, drink and a wife have corrupted many a better man. Don't answer, Baas, but start me, for I am growing afraid." Placing his hand at the back of the stone, Leonard gave it a slight push. It began to move, very slowly at first, then more fast and faster yet, till it was rushing over the smooth ice pathway with a whirling sound like that produced by the flight of a bird. Presently it had reached the bottom of the first long slope, and was climbing the gentle rise opposite, but so slowly that for a while Leonard thought that it was going to stop. It crossed its brow, however, and vanished for a few seconds into a dip where the watchers could not see it. Then it appeared again at the head of the second and longest slope, of which the angle was very steep. Down this the stone rushed like an arrow from a bow, till it reached the narrow waist of the bridge, whereof the general conformation bore some resemblance to that of a dead wasp lying on its back. Indeed, from where Leonard and Juanna stood, the span of ice at this point seemed to be no thicker than a silver thread, while Otter and the stone might have been a fly upon the thread. Now of a sudden Leonard distinctly saw the rock sledge and its living burden, which just then was travelling its swiftest, move upward as though it had leaped into the air, and then continue its course along the rising place which represented the throat of the wasp, till at length it stopped. Leonard looked at his watch. The time occupied by the transit was just 50 seconds, and the distance could not have been much less than half a mile. "See," he cried to Juanna, who all this while had sat with her hand before her eyes to shut out the vision of the dwarf's dreadful progress. "He has crossed safely," and he pointed to a figure that appeared to be dancing with glee upon the breast of the snow slope. As he spoke, a faint sound reached their ears, for in those immense silences sound can travel far. It was Otter shouting, and his words seemed to be, "Come on, boss, it is easy." "I am glad he was safe," said Juanna faintly, "but now we must follow him. Take my handkerchief, Leonard, and tie it over my eyes, please, for I cannot bear to look. The idol's head was nothing to this." Leonard obeyed her, bidding her not to be afraid. "Oh, but I am terribly afraid," she answered. "I never was so much frightened in all my life, and I have lost the jewels. Leonard, do forgive me for behaving so badly to you. I know that I have behaved badly in many ways, though I have been too proud to admit it before. But now, when I am going to die, I want to beg your pardon. I hope you will think kindly of me, Leonard, when I am dead, for I do love you with all my heart, indeed I do." And tears began to roll down beneath the bandage. "Dearest," he answered, kissing her tenderly, "as we are tied together, it seems that if you die, I must die too. Do not break down after you have borne so much." "It is the jewels," she sobbed, "the jewels. I feel as though I have committed a murder." "Oh, bother the jewels," said Leonard. "We can think about them afterwards." And he advanced towards the flat stone, Juanna feeling the while as though they were two of Carrier's victims about to know the marriage of the Loire. As they came to the stone, Leonard heard a sound behind him, a sound of footsteps muffled by the snow, and glancing round he saw Soa rushing towards them, almost naked, a spear wound in her side, and the light of madness shining in her eyes. "Get back," he said sternly, "or—" and he lifted the great spear. "Oh, shepherdess," she wailed, "take me with you, shepherdess, for I cannot live without you." "Tell her to go away," said Juanna, recognizing the voice. "I never want to see her any more." "You hear, Soa," answered Leonard. "Stay, how is it gone yonder? Speak truly." "I do not know, Deliverer. When I left, Olfan and his brother still held the mouth of the tunnel and were unhurt, but the captain was dead. I slipped past them and got this as I went," and she pointed to the gash in her side. "If he can hold out a little longer, help may reach him," muttered Leonard. Then without more words he laid himself and Juanna face downwards on the broad stone. "Now, Juanna," he said, "we are going to start. Grip fast with your right hand, and see that you do not leave go of the edge of the stone, or we shall both slip off it." "Oh, take me with you, Shepherdess, take me with you, and I will be wicked no more, but serve you as of old," shrilled the voice of Soa in so despairing a cry that the rocks rang. "Hold fast," said Leonard through his set teeth, as, disengaging his right hand from about Juanna's waist, he seized the handle of the spear and pressed its broad blade against the knob of rock behind them. Now the stone, that was balanced on the very verge of the declivity, trembled beneath them, and now, slowly and majestically, as a vessel starting from her slips when the launching cord is severed, it began to move down the icy way. For the first second it scarcely seemed to stir, then the motion grew palpable, and at that instant Leonard heard a noise behind him, and felt his left foot clasped by a human hand. There was a jerk that nearly dragged them off the sledge, but he held fast to the front edge of the stone, and though he could still feel the hand upon his ankle, the strain became almost imperceptible. End of chapter 38. Of the People of the Mist by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Passing of the Bridge. Lifting his head very cautiously, Leonard looked over his shoulder, and the mystery was explained. In her madness and the fury of her love for the mistress whom she had outraged and betrayed, Soa had striven to throw herself upon the stone with them so soon as she saw it commence to move. She was too late, and feeling herself slipping forward, she grasped despairingly at the first thing that came to her hand, which chanced to be Leonard's ankle. Now she must accompany them upon their awesome journey, only while they rode upon the stone she was dragged after them upon her breast. A flash of pity passed through Leonard's brain as he realized her fearful plight. Then for a while he forgot all about her, since his attention was amply occupied with his own and Juanna's peril. Now they were rushing down the long slope with an ever-increasing velocity, and now they breasted the first rise, during the last 10 yards of which, as in the case of Otter, the pace of the stone slowed down so much in proportion to the progressive exhaustion of its momentum that Leonard thought they were coming to a standstill. Then it was that he kicked out viciously, striving to free himself from the weight of Soa, which threatened to bring them to a common ruin. But she clung to him like ivy to a tree, and he desisted from his efforts, fearing he should cause their sledge to alter its course. On the very top of the rise the motion of the stone decreased almost to nothingness, then little by little increased once more, as they traversed a short, sharp dip, the same in which they had lost sight of Otter, to be succeeded by a gentle rise. So far, though exciting and novel, their journey had been comparatively safe, for the path was broad and the ice perfectly smooth. Its terrors were to come. Looking forward, Leonard saw that they were at the commencement of a decline measuring 400 or 500 yards in length, and so steep that, even had it offered a good foothold, human beings could scarcely have stood upon it. As yet the tongue of ice was 50 paces or more in width, but it narrowed rapidly as it fell, till at length, near the opposite shore of the ravine, it fined away to a point like that of a great white needle, and then seemed to break off altogether. Now they were well under way, and now they sped down the steep green ice at a pace that can hardly be imagined, though perhaps it is sometimes equalled by an eagle rushing on its quarry from some vast height of air. Indeed, it is possible that the sensations of an eagle making his headlong descent and those of Leonard may have been very similar, with the important exception that the bird feels no fear, whereas absolute terror are the only words wherewith to describe the mental state of the man. So smooth was the ice and so precipitous its pitch that he felt as though he were falling through space, unsupported by anything, for travelling at that speed the friction of the stone was imperceptible. Only the air shrieked as they clove it, and Juanna's long tresses, torn by it from their fastenings, streamed out behind her like a veil. Down they went, still down. Half, 2/3 of the distance was done. Then he looked again and saw the horror that lay before them. Already the bridge was narrow, barely the width of a small room. 60 yards further on, it tapered to so fine a point that their stone would almost cover its breadth, and beneath it, on either side, yawned that unmeasured gulf wherein Nam was lost with the jewels. Nor was this all, for at its narrowest the ice band was broken away for a space of 10 or 12 feet, to continue on the further side of the gap for a few yards at a somewhat lower level, and then run upwards at a steep incline to the breast of the snow where Otter sat in safety. On they whizzed, ice beneath them and before them, and ice in Leonard's heart, for he was frozen with fear. His breath had left him because of the rush of their progress, but his senses remained painfully acute. Involuntarily he glanced over the edge of the stone, saw the sheer depths below him, and found himself wondering what was the law that kept their sledge upon this ribbon of ice, where it seemed so easy for it to whirl off into space. Now the gap was immediately in front of them. God help us, he murmured, or rather thought, for there was no time for words, and they had left the road of ice and were flying through the air as though the stone which carried them were a living thing that, seeing the peril, had gathered up its energies and sprung forward for its life. What happened? Leonard never knew for certain, and Otter swore that his heart leaped from his bosom and stood in front of his eyes, so that he could not see. Before they touched the further point of ice, while they were in the air indeed, they, or rather Leonard, heard a hideous scream, and felt a jerk so violent that his hold of the stone was loosened, and it passed from beneath them. Then came a shock, less heavy than might have been expected, and lo, they were spinning onwards down the polished surface of the ice, while the stone which had borne them so far sped on in front like a horse that has thrown its rider. Leonard felt the rubbing of the ice burn him like a hot iron. He felt also that his ankle was freed from the hand that had held it. Then for some minutes he knew no more, for his senses left him. When they returned, it was to hear the voice of Otter crying, lie still, boss, do not stir for your life. I come." Instantly he was wide awake, and moving his head ever so little, saw their situation. Then he wished that he had remained asleep, for it was this. The impetus of their rush had carried them almost to the line where the ice stopped and the rock and snow began, within some 15 feet of it indeed, but those 15 feet were of the smoothest ice and very sheer, so smooth and sheer that no man could hope to climb them. Below them the slope continued for about 13 or 14 yards till it met the corresponding incline that led to the gap in the bridge. On this surface of ice they were lying spread-eagled. For a moment Leonard wondered how it was that they did not slide back to the bottom of the slope, there to remain till they perished, for without ropes and proper implements no human being could scale it. Then he saw that a chance had befallen them, which in after days he was wont to attribute to the direct intervention of Providence. It will be remembered that when they started, Leonard had pushed the rock off with a spear, which Olfan had given them. This spear he drew in again as they began to move, placing it between his chest and the stone, for he thought that it might be of service to him should they succeed in crossing the gulf. When they were jerked from the sledge and left to slide along the ice on the further side of the gap, in obedience to the impetus given to them by the frightful speed at which they were travelling, the spear, in obeying the same laws of motion, accompanied them, but being of a less specific gravity, lagged behind in the race, just as a stone, which was heaviest, outstripped them. As it happened, near the top of the rise there was a fissure in the ice, and in this fissure the weapon had become fixed, its weighted blade causing it to assume an upright position. When the senseless bodies of Leonard and Juanna had slid as far up the slope as the unexpected energy of their impetus would allow, naturally enough they began to move back again in accordance with the laws of gravity. Then it was, as luck would have it, that the spear, fixed in the crevice of the ice, saved them from destruction, for it chanced that the descent of their two forms, passing on either side of it, was checked by the handle of the weapon, which caught the hide rope whereby they were bound together. All this Leonard took in by degrees. Also he discovered that Juanna was either dead or senseless. At the time he could not tell which. "What are you going to do?" he asked Otter, who by now was on the verge of the ice 15 feet above them. "Cut steps and pull you up, Baas," answered the dwarf cheerfully. "It will not be easy," said Leonard, glancing over his shoulder at the long slope beneath, "and if we slip or the rope breaks—" "Do not talk of slipping, Baas," replied Otter, as he began to hack at the ice with the priest's heavy knife. "And as for the rope, if it was strong enough for the water dweller to drag me round the pool by, it is strong enough to hold you too, although it has seen some wear. I only wish I had such another, for then this matter would be simple." Working furiously, Otter hacked at the hard surface of the ice. The first 2 steps he hollowed from the top of the slope lying on his stomach. After this, difficulties presented themselves which seemed insuperable, for he could not chip at the ice when he had nothing by which to support himself. "What is to be done now?" said Leonard. "Keep cool, Baas, and give me time to think," and for a moment Otter squatted down and was silent. "I have it," he said presently, and rising, he took off his goatskin cloak and cut it into strips, each strip measuring about 2 inches in width by 2 feet 6 inches in length. These strips he knotted together firmly, making a serviceable rope of them, long enough to reach to where Leonard and Juanna were suspended on the stout handle of the spear. Then he took the stake which had already done him such good service, and sharpening its point, fixed it as deeply as he could into the snow and earth on the border of the ice belt, and tied the skin rope to it. "Now, Baas," he said, "all is well, for I can begin from the bottom." And without further words he let himself down till he hung beside them. "Is the shepherdess dead, Baas?" he asked, glancing at Juanna's pale face and closed eyes, "or does she only sleep?" "I think that she is in a swoon," answered Leonard, "but for heaven's sake be quick, Otter, for I am being frozen on this ice. What is your plan now?" "This, Baas: to tie about your middle the end of the rope that I have made from the cloak, then to undo the cord that binds you and the shepherdess together, and return to the top of the slope. Once there, I can pull her up by the hide line, for it is strong, and she will slip easily over the ice, and you can follow." "Good," said Leonard. Then, hanging by one hand, the dwarf managed, with such assistance as Leonard could give him, to knot beneath Leonard's arms the end of the rope which he had constructed from the skin garment. Next he set to work to untie the hide cord, thereby freeing him from Juanna. And now came the most difficult and dangerous part of the task, for Leonard, suspended from the shaft of the spear by one hand, must support Juanna's senseless form with the other, while Otter made shift to drag himself to the summit of the ice, holding the hide line in his teeth. The spear bent dreadfully, and Leonard did not dare to put any extra strain upon the roughly fastened cord of goatskin by which the dwarf was hauling himself up the ice, for if it gave, they must all be precipitated to the dip below, there to perish miserably. Faint and frozen as he was, it seemed hours to him before Otter reached the top and called to him to let go of Juanna. Leonard obeyed, and seating himself on the snow, his feet supported by the edge of the ice, the dwarf put out his strength and began to pull her up. Strong as he was, it proved as much as he was able to do. Indeed, had Juanna lain on any other material than ice, he could not have done it at all. But in the end he succeeded, and with a gasp of gratitude Leonard saw her stretched safe upon the snow. Now Otter, hastily undoing the cord from Juanna's waist, made it into a running noose, which he threw down to Leonard, who placed it over his shoulders. Having lifted the spear from the cleft in which it stood, he commenced his ascent. His first movements cost him a pang of agony, and no wonder, for the blood from wounds that had been caused by the friction of his flesh as he was hurled along the surface of the slide had congealed, freezing his limbs to the ice, whence they could not easily be loosened. The pain, sharp as it was, did him good, however, for it aroused his benumbed energies and enabled him to drag on the goatskin cord with all his strength, while Otter tugged at that which was beneath his arms. Well for him was it that the dwarf had taken the precaution of throwing down this second line, for presently Otter's stake, which had no firm hold in the frozen earth, came out and slid away, striking Leonard as it passed and bearing the knotted lengths of the cloak with it. The dwarf cried aloud and bent forward as though he were about to fall. By a fearful effort he recovered himself and held fast the rope in his hand, while Leonard, suspended by it, swung to and fro on the surface of the ice like the pendulum of a clock. Then followed the most terrible moments of all their struggles against the difficulties of this merciless place. The dwarf held fast above, and Leonard, ceasing to swing, lay with hands and legs outstretched on the face of the ice. "Now, Baas," said Otter, "be brave, and when I pull, do you wiggle forward." He tugged till the thin hide rope stretched, while Leonard clawed and kicked at the ice with his toes, knees, and disengaged hand. Alas, it gave no hold. He might as well have tried to climb a dome of plate glass at an angle of 60 degrees. "Rest a while, Baas," said the dwarf, whose breath was coming in great sobs. "Then make a nick in the ice with the blade of the spear, and when next I pull, try to set some of your weight upon it." Leonard did as he was bid without speaking. "Now," said the dwarf, and with a push and a struggle Leonard was 2 feet higher up the incline. Again the process was repeated, and this time he got his left hand into the lowest of the 2 steps that Otter had hacked with the knife, and once more they paused for breath. A third effort, the fiercest of them all, a clasping of hands, and he was lying trembling like a frightened child above the glacier's lip. The ordeal was over, that danger was done with, but at what cost? Leonard's nerves were completely shattered. He could not stand, his face was bleeding, his nails were broken, and the bone of one knee was exposed by the friction of the ice, to say nothing of the shock to the system and the bruises which he had received when he was hurled from the stone. Otter's condition was a little better, but his hands were cut by the rope, and he was utterly exhausted with the toil and the strain of suspense. Indeed, Of the three, Juanna had come off by far the best, for she swooned at the very beginning of the passage of the bridge, and when they were jerked from the stone, being lighter than Leonard, she had fallen upon him. Moreover, the thick goatskin cloak which was wrapped about her had protected her from all hurt beyond a few trifling cuts and bruises. Of their horrible position when they were hanging to the spear, and the rest of the adventure, including the death of Soa, she knew nothing, and it was well, for her reason, that this was so. "Otter," murmured Leonard in a shaking voice, "have you lost that gourd of spirit?" "No, Baas, it is safe." "Thank heaven," he said. "Hold it to my lips if you can." The dwarf lifted it with a trembling hand, and Leonard gulped down the fiery liquor. "That's better," he said. "Take some yourself." "Nay, Baas, I have sworn to touch drink no more," Otter answered, looking at the gourd longingly. "Besides, you and the Shepherdess will want it all. I have some food here, and I will eat." "What happened to Soa, Otter?" "I could not see rightly, Baas. I was too frightened, and much more frightened than I had been when I rode the stone myself. But I think that her legs caught in the ice on this side of the hole, and so she fell. It was a good end for her, the vicious old cow," he added, with a touch of satisfaction. "It was very near being a bad end for us," answered Leonard, "but we have managed to come out of it alive somehow. Not for all the rubies in the world would I cross that place again." "Nor I, Baas. Wow, it was awful. Now my stomach went through my head, and now my head went through my stomach, and the air was red and green and blue, and devils shouted at me out of it. Yes, and when I came to the hole, there I saw the water dweller all fashioned in fire, waiting with an open mouth to eat me. It was a drink that made me think of these things, Baas, and that is why I have sworn to touch it no more." "Yes, I swore it as I flew through the air and saw the flaming water dweller beneath me. And now, Baas, I am a little rested, so let us try and wake up the Shepherdess and get us gone." "Yes," said Leonard, "though I am sure I do not know where we are to go to. It can't be far, for I am nearly spent." Then crawling to where Juanna lay wrapped in her cloak, Otter poured some of the native spirit down her throat, while Leonard rubbed her hands. Presently this treatment produced its effect, for she sat up with a start, and seeing the ice before her, began to shriek, saying, "Take me away! I can't do it, Leonard, I can't indeed." "All right, dear," he answered, "you have done it. We are over." "Oh," she said, "I am thankful. But where is Soa? I thought that I heard her throw herself down behind us." "Soa is dead," he answered. "She fell down the gulf and nearly pulled us with her. I will tell you about it afterwards. You are not fit to hear it now. Come, dear, let us be going out of this accursed place." Juanna staggered to her feet. "I am so stiff and sore that I can hardly stand," she said. "But, Leonard, what is the matter with you? You are covered with blood." "I will tell you afterwards," he replied again. Then Otter collected their baggage, which consisted chiefly of the hide line and the spear, and they crawled forward up the snow slope. Some 20 or 30 yards ahead of them, and almost side by side, lay the two glacier stones on which they had passed the bridge, and near them those which Otter had dispatched as pioneers on the previous morning. They looked at them wondering. Who could have believed that these inert things, not an hour before, had been speeding down the icy way quicker than any express train that ever travelled, and they with them? One thing was certain: did they remain unbroken for another 2 or 3 million years, and that is a short life for a stone, they would never again make so strange a journey. Then the three toiled on to the top of the snow slope, which was about 400 yards away. "Look, Baas," said Otter, who had turned to gaze fond farewell at the gulf behind. "There are people yonder on the further side." He was right. On the far brink of the crevasse were the forms of men, who seemed to be waving their arms in the air and shouting. But whether these were the priests who, having overcome the resistance of Olfan, had pursued the fugitives to kill them, or the soldiers of the king who had conquered the priests, the distance would not allow them to see. The fate of Olfan and the future domestic history of the people of the mist were now sealed books to them, for they never heard any more of these matters, nor are they likely to do so. Then the travellers began to descend from field to field of snow, the great peak above alone remaining to remind them that they were near to the country of the mist. Once they stopped to eat a little of such food as they had with them, and often enough to rest, for their strength was small. Indeed, as they dragged themselves wearily forward, each of the men holding Juanna by the hand, Leonard found himself wondering how it came about, putting aside the bodily perils from which they had escaped, that they had survived the exhaustion and the horrors, physical and mental, of the last 48 hours. But there they were, still alive, though in a sorry plight, and before evening they found themselves below the snow line in a warm and genial climate. "I must stop," said Juanna, as the sun began to set. "I can drag myself no further." Leonard looked at Otter in despair. "There's a big tree yonder, Baas," said the dwarf, with an attempt at cheerfulness, "and water by it. It is a good place to camp, and here the air is warm. We shall not suffer from cold. Nay, we are lucky indeed. Think how we passed last night." They reached the tree, and Juanna sank down, half fainting against its bole. With difficulty Leonard persuaded her to swallow a little meat and a mouthful of spirit, and then, to his relief, she relapsed into a condition which partook more of the nature of stupor than of sleep. End of chapter 39. Of the People of the Mist by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Otter's Farewell. The night which followed, Leonard is wont to declare, proved to be the very worst that he ever spent in his life. Notwithstanding his intense weariness, he could not sleep. His nerves were too shattered to allow of it. Whenever he shut his eyes, he saw himself hanging head downwards over the oubliette in the cell beneath the idol, or flying through the air across the dreadful gap of the ice bridge, or in some other position of terror, similar to those with which they had made such intimate acquaintance of late. Did these visions cease? From time to time he seemed to hear the voice of Francisco bidding him farewell, the yell of Soa falling to her dreadful death, or Nam raving his last defiance at them. Also his hurts, which were many, gave him great pain, and though the climate here was mild, the breeze from the snow heights chilled him through, and they had not even a match wherewith to light a fire and scare the wild beasts that roared about them. Rarely have three human beings been in a position more desolate and desperate than that in which they found themselves this night, exhausted, unarmed, almost without food or clothing, and wandering, they knew not where, through the vastness of Central Africa. Unless some help was found them, as Leonard was aware, they must perish of starvation, by the fangs of lions or the spears of natives. It was impossible that they could live through another week, and the thought came into his mind that it would be well for them if they died that night and had done with it. It would be well, yes, and it would have been better if he had been laid by the side of his brother Tom before he ever listened to Soa's accursed tale of the People of the Mist and their treasures of rubies. Only then he would never have known Juanna, for she must have died in the slave camp. This was the fruit of putting faith in the visions of dying men, and yet It was strange. He had nearly got the money, and by the help of a woman, for those rubies would have sufficed to buy back Outram 10 times over. But alas, nearly is not quite. That dream was done with, and even if they escaped, it would be to find himself more utterly beggared than before, for now he would be a married beggar. At last the night wore away and the dawn came, but Juanna did not wake until the sun was high. Leonard, who had crept to a little distance, for now he was quite unable to walk, saw her sit up and crawled back to her. She stared at him vacantly and said something about Jane Beach. Then he knew that she was wandering. There was nothing to be done. What could be done in that wilderness with a woman in delirium, except wait for death? Accordingly, Leonard and Otter waited for some hours. Then the dwarf, who was in far the best condition of the three, took the spear, Olfan's gift, and said that he would go and seek for food, since their store was exhausted. Leonard nodded, though he knew there was little chance of a man armed with a spear alone being able to kill game, and Otter went. Towards evening he returned, reporting that he had seen plenty of buck, but could not get near them, which was just what his master expected. That night they passed hungry, by turns watching Juanna, who was still delirious. At dawn Otter started out again, leaving Leonard, who had been unable to sleep as on the previous night, crouched at Juanna's side, his face buried in his hands. Before noon Leonard chanced to look up and saw the dwarf reeling towards him, for he also was faint with want of food. Indeed, his great head and almost naked body, through which the skin of the misshapen bones seemed to start in every direction, presented so curious a spectacle that his master, whose brain was shaken by weakness, began to laugh. "Don't laugh, boss," gasped the dwarf. "Either I am mad or we are saved." "Then I think you must be mad, Otter, for we shall take a deal of saving," he answered wearily, for he had ceased to believe in good fortune. "What is it?" "This, boss. There is a white man coming this way, and more than 100 servants with him. They are marching up the mountain slope." "You are certainly mad, Otter," Leonard replied. "What in the names of Jâl and Aca is a white man doing here? I am the only one of that species who has been fool enough to penetrate these regions, I and Francisco," and he shut his eyes and dozed off. Otter looked at him for a while, then he tapped his forehead significantly and started down the slope again. An hour later, Leonard, still dozing, was awakened by the sound of many voices, and by a hand that shook him not too gently. "Awake, boss," said the dwarf, for the hand was his. "I have caught the white man and brought him here." Leonard staggered to his feet and saw before him, surrounded by gun bearers and other attendants, an English gentleman, rather under than over middle age, with a round and kindly face tanned by the sun, and somewhat deep-set dark eyes, having an eyeglass fixed in one of them, through which its wearer regarded him with much commiseration. "How do you do, sir?" said the stranger in a pleasant voice. "So far as I can make out from your servant, you seem to be in a baddish way. By George, there's a lady." "How do you do?" answered Leonard. "Capital sun helmet that of yours. I envy it, but you see I have had to go bareheaded lately," and he ran his fingers through his matted hair. "Who's the maker of that 8-bore? Looks a good gun." "Achmet," said the stranger, turning to an Arab at his side, "go to the first donkey and fetch this lord of the earth a pint of champagne and some oatmeal cakes. He seems to want them. Tell the bearers also to bring up my tent and to pitch it there by the water. Quick now." 48 hours had passed, and the benevolent stranger was sitting on a camp stool at the door of his tent, looking at 2 forms that lay wrapped in blankets and comfortably asleep within it. "I suppose they will wake some time," he murmured, dropping his eyeglass and taking the pipe from his mouth. "The quinine and champagne have done them a lot of good. There is nothing like quinine and champagne. But what an unconscionable liar that dwarf must be! There is only one thing he can do better, and that is eat. I never saw a chap stow away so much grub, though I must say he looks as though he needed it. Still, allowing for all deductions, it is a precious queer story. Who are they, and what the deuce are they doing here? One thing is clear, I never saw a finer looking man nor a prettier girl," and he filled his pipe again, replaced the eyeglass in his eye, and began smoking. 10 minutes later Juanna sat up suddenly, whereupon the stranger withdrew out of sight. She looked round her wildly, then, seeing Leonard lying at the further side of the tent, she crept to him and began kissing him, saying, "Leonard, thank God that you are still alive. Leonard, I dreamed that we both were dead. Thank God that you are alive." Then the man who had been thus adjured woke up also and returned her caresses. "By George, this is quite affecting," said the traveller. "I suppose that they are married. If not, they ought to be. Anyway, I had better clear out for a while." An hour later he returned to find that the pair had made themselves as presentable as soap and water and some few spare garments which he had sent to Leonard would allow, and were now sitting in the sun outside the tent. He advanced, lifting his helmet, and they rose to meet him. "I suppose that I had better introduce myself," he said with some hesitation, for he was a shy man. "I am an English traveller, doing a little exploring on my own account, for lack of any other occupation, and my name is Sydney Wallace." "Mine is Leonard Outram," answered Leonard, "and this young lady is Miss Juanna Rodd." Mr. Wallace started and bowed again. So they were not married. "We are deeply indebted to you, sir," went on Leonard, "for you have rescued us from death." "Not at all," answered Mr. Wallace. "You must thank that servant of yours, the dwarf, and not me, for if he had not seen us I should have passed a mile or more to the left of you. The fact is that I am rather fond of mountaineering, and seeing this great peak above us, I am told that it is the highest in the Bisa Mushinga Mountains, I thought I might as well have a try at it before I turn homewards, via Lake Nyassa, Livingstonia, Blantyre, and Quillimane. But perhaps you will not mind telling me how you came to be here. I have heard something from the dwarf, but his tale seems a little too steep." "I am afraid you will think ours rather steeper, Mr. Wallace," said Leonard, and he proceeded to give him a short outline of their adventures. When he came to their arrival among the People of the Mist, and described the inauguration of Otter and Juanna as gods in the temple of the Colossus, he noticed that his auditor had let the eyeglass fall from his round eye and was regarding him with mild amazement. "I am afraid that all this does not interest you," said Leonard stiffly. "On the contrary, Mr. Outram, it interests me very much. I am exceedingly fond of romances, and this is rather a good one." "As I thought, it is scarcely worth while to go on," said Leonard again. "Well, I cannot wonder that you do not believe me." "Leonard," interposed Juanna quietly, "you still have the star ruby. Show it to Mr. Wallace." He did so, somewhat sulkily, and then, as he seemed disinclined to say anything more, Juanna took up the tale, showing in evidence of its truth the spear, the frayed rope, and the tattered white robe which she had worn in her character of Aca, and indeed still wore beneath poor Francisco's cassock, for she had no other. Mr. Wallace heard her out, then, without making any comment, he rose, saying that he must try to shoot some meat for the camp, and begged that they would make themselves comfortable until his return that evening. Before sundown he reappeared, and coming straight to the tent, asked their pardon for his incredulity. "I have been up yonder," he said, following your spoor backwards. I have seen the snow bridge and the stones, and the nicks which the dwarf cut in the ice. All is just as you told me, and it only remains for me to congratulate you upon having escaped from the strangest series of dangers that I ever heard of." And he held out his hand, which both Leonard and Juanna shook warmly. "By the way," he added, "I sent men to examine the gulf for several miles, but they report to me that they found no spot where it would be possible to descend it, and I fear, therefore, that the jewels are lost for ever. I confess that I should have liked to try to penetrate into the Mist country, but my nerves are not strong enough for the ice bridge, and if they were, stones won't slide uphill. Besides, you must have had about enough of roughing it, and will be anxious to turn your faces towards civilization. So after you have rested another couple of days, I think that we had better start for Quillimane, which, barring accidents, is about 3 months' march from here." Shortly afterwards they started accordingly, but with the details of their march we need not concern ourselves. An exception must be made, however, in the case of a single event which happened at the mission station at Blantyre. That event was the wedding of Leonard and Juanna in conformance with the ceremonies of their own church. No word of marriage had been spoken between them for some weeks, and yet the thought of it was never out of the minds of either. Indeed, had their feelings been much less tender towards each other than was the case, it would still have been desirable, in view of the extraordinary intimacy into which they had been thrown during the past months, that they should become man and wife. Leonard felt that alone as she was in the wide world, nothing short of mutual aversion would have justified him in separating from Juanna, and as it was love and not aversion that he entertained towards her, this argument came home to him with overmastering force. "Juanna," he said to her on the day of their arrival in Blantyre, "you remember some words that passed between your father and myself when he lay upon his deathbed, to the effect that, should we both wish it, he trusted my honour to remarry you formally as soon as an opportunity might arise. Now the opportunity is here, and I ask you if you desire to take me for your husband, as above everything in the world I desire to make you my beloved wife." She coloured to her beautiful eyes and answered in a voice that was almost a whisper: "If you wish it, and think me worthy of you, Leonard, you know that I wish it also. I have always loved you, dear, yes, even when I was behaving worse to you. But there is Jane Beach." "I have told you before, Juanna," he answered with some little irritation, "and now I tell you again, that Jane Beach and I have done with each other." "I am sure that I am very glad to hear it," Juanna replied, still somewhat dubiously. "The rest of that conversation, being of a private character, will scarcely interest the public." When he spoke thus, Leonard little knew after what fashion Jane Beach and he had wound up their old love affair. 2 days later Leonard Outram took Juanna Rodd to his wife, to have and to hold, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and cherish till death did them part, and their rescuer, Sydney Wallace, who by now had become their fast friend, gave her away. Very curious were the memories that passed through Juanna's mind as she stood by her husband's side in the little grass-roofed chapel of Blantyre, for was this not the 3rd time that she had been married, and now only of her own free will? She bethought her of that wild scene in the slave camp, of Francisco who died to save her, and of the blessings which he had called down upon her and this very man, and of that other scene in the rock prison when, to protect Leonard's life, she was wed, according to the custom of the Children of the Mist, to that true-hearted gentleman and savage, Olfan, their king. Then she awoke with a happy sigh To know that the lover at her side could never be taken from her again until death claimed one of them. "We shall be dreadfully poor, Leonard," she said to him afterwards. "It would have been much better for you, dear, if I had fallen into the gulf instead of the rubies." "I am not of your opinion, love," he answered with a smile, for he was very happy. "Hang the rubies! Your price is far above rubies, and no man may struggle against fate. I have always been able to make a living for myself heretofore, and I do not doubt that I shall continue to do so for both of us, and we will leave the rest to Providence. You are more to me, Juanna, than any wealth, more even than Outram." That evening Mr. Wallace found Otter gazing disconsolately at the little house in which Leonard and Juanna were staying. "Are you sad because your master is married, Otter?" he asked. "No," answered the dwarf, "I am glad. For months he has been running after her and dreaming of her, and now at last he has got her. Henceforth she must dream of him and run after him, and he will have time to think about other people who love him quite as well." Another month or so went by while the party journeyed in easy stages towards the coast, and never had wedded lovers a happier honeymoon, or more perhaps unconventional than passed by Leonard and Juanna, though perhaps Mr. Wallace and Otter did not find the contemplation of their raptures a very exhilarating occupation. At last they reached Quillimane in safety, and pitched their camp on some rising ground outside of the settlement, which is unhealthy. Next morning at daybreak Mr. Wallace started for the post office, where he expected to find letters. Leonard and Juanna did not accompany him, but went for a walk before the sun grew hot. Then it was, as they walked, that a certain fact came home to them, namely, that they could not avail themselves of their host's kindness any longer, and further, that they were quite penniless. When one is moving slowly across the vast African wilds and living on the abounding game, love and kisses seem an ample provision for all wants. But the matter strikes the mind in a different light after the trip is done, and civilization with its necessities looms large in the immediate future. "What are we to do, Juanna?" asked Leonard in dismay. "We have no money to enable us to reach Natal or anywhere, and no credit on which to draw." "I suppose that we must sell the great ruby," she answered with a sigh, "though I shall be sorry to part with it." "Nobody will buy such a stone here, Juanna, and it may not be a real ruby after all. Perhaps Wallace might be willing to advance me a trifle on it, though I hate having to ask him." Then they went back to breakfast, which they did not find an altogether cheerful meal. As they were finishing, Mr. Wallace returned from the town. "I have good news," he said. "The British India mail will be here in 2 days, so I shall pay off my men and go up to Aden in her, and thence home. Of course you will come too, for, like me, I expect you have had enough of Africa for the present. Here are some copies of the weekly edition of the Times. Look through them, Mrs. Outram, and see the news while I read my letters." Leonard turned aside moodily and lit his pipe. How was he to find money to take even a third-class passage on the British India mail? But Juanna, obeying the instinct that prompts a woman to keep up appearances at all hazards, took one of the papers and opened it, although the tears which swam in her eyes would scarcely suffer her to see the print. Thus things went on for 10 minutes or more, as she idly turned the pages of 2 or 3 issues of the weekly Times, trying to collect her thoughts and pick up the thread of current events. But it is wonderful how uninteresting and far away those events appear after the reader has been living a life to herself for a year or so, and Juanna, preoccupied as she was with her own thoughts, was about to give up the attempt as a failure, when the name of Outram started to her eyes. A minute later her 2 companions heard a sharp exclamation and turned round. "What is the matter, Mrs. Outram?" said Wallace. "Has France declared war against Germany, or is Mr. Gladstone dead?" "Oh no, something much more important than that. Listen to this advertisement, Leonard. If Leonard Outram, second son of Sir Thomas Outram, Bart, late of Outram Hall, who was last heard of in the territory to the north of Delagoa Bay, Eastern Africa, or in the event of his death his lawful heirs, would communicate with the undersigned, he or they will hear something very greatly to his or their advantage. Thompson and Turner, 2 Albert Court, London, E.C. "Are you joking, Juanna?" said Leonard after a pause. "Look for yourself," she answered. He took the paper and read and reread the notice. "Well, there is one certain thing," he said, "that no one ever stood in greater need of hearing something to his advantage than I do at this moment. For excepting the ruby, which may not be a true stone, we haven't a stiver to bless ourselves with in the world. Indeed, I don't know how I am to avail myself of Messrs. Thompson and Turner's kind invitation, unless I write them a letter and go to live in a Kaffir hut till the answer comes." "Don't let that trouble you, my dear fellow," said Wallace. "I can get plenty of cash here, and it is very much at your service." "I am ashamed to take further advantage of your kindness," answered Leonard, flushing. "This advertisement may mean nothing, or perhaps a legacy of £50, though I am sure I don't know who would leave me even that sum. And then, how should I repay you?" "Stuff," said Wallace. "Well," replied Leonard, "beggars must put their pride in their pockets. If you will lend me a couple of £100 and take the ruby in pledge, I shall be even more grateful to you than I am at present, and that is saying a good deal." On this business basis the matter was ultimately arranged, though within half an hour Wallace handed back the great stone into Juanna's keeping, bidding her keep it dark, an injunction which she obeyed in every sense of the word, for she hid the ruby where once the poison had lain, in her hair. 2 busy days went by, and on the third morning a messenger came running from the town to announce that the northward mail was in sight. Then it was that Otter, who had all this while said nothing, advanced solemnly towards Leonard and Juanna, holding his hand outstretched. "What is the matter, Otter?" asked Leonard, who was engaged in helping Wallace to pack his hunting trophies. "Nothing, Boss. I have come to say good bye to you and the Shepherdess, that is all. I wish to go now, before I see the steam fish carry you away." "Go," said Leonard. "You wish to go?" Somehow Otter had become so much part of their lives that, even in their preparations to leave for England, neither of them had ever thought of parting from him. "Why do you wish to go?" he added. "Because I am an ugly old black dog, Baas, and could be of no further use to you out yonder," and he nodded towards the sea. "I suppose you mean that you do not want to leave Africa, even for a while," said Leonard, with ill-concealed grief and vexation. "Well, it is hard to part with you like this. Also," he added with a little laugh, "it is awkward, for I owe you more than a year's wages, and have not the money to spare to pay you. Moreover, I have taken your passage on the ship." "What does the boss say?" asked Otter slowly. "That he has bought me a place in the steamfish?" Leonard nodded. "Then I beg your pardon, Boss. I thought that you had done with me, and were going to throw me away like a worn-out spear." "So you wish to come, Otter?" said Leonard. "Wish to come?" he answered wonderingly. "Are you not my father and my mother, and is not the place where you may be my place? Do you know what I was going to do just now, Boss? I was going to climb to the top of a tree and watch the steam fish till it vanished over the edge of the world. Then I would have taken this rope, which already has served me well among the people of the mist, and set it about my throat and hanged myself there in the tree, for that is the best end for old dogs, boss." Leonard turned away to hide the tears which started to his eyes, for the dwarf's fidelity touched him more than he cared to show. Seeing his trouble, Juanna took up the talk to cover his confusion. "I fear that you will find it cold over yonder, Otter," she said. "It is a land of fog, they tell me, and there are none of your own people, no wives or Kaffir beer. Also, we may be poor and have to live hardly." "Of fog I have seen something lately, Shepherdess," answered the dwarf, "and yet I was happy in the fog because I was near the boss. Of hard living I have seen something also, and still I was happy because I was near the boss. Once I had a wife and beer in plenty, more than a man could want, and then I was unhappy because they estranged me from the boss, and he knew that I had ceased to be Otter, his servant, whom he trusted and had become a beast. Therefore, Shepherdess, I would see no more of wives and beer." "Otter, you idiot," broke in Leonard brusquely, "you had better stop talking and get something to eat, for it will be the last meal that you will wish to see for many a day." "The boss is right," replied the dwarf. "Moreover, I am hungry, for sorrow has kept me from food for these 2 days. Now I will fill myself full, that I may have something to offer to the black water when he shakes me in his anger." End of chapter 40. Of the People of the Mist by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The end of the adventure. 6 weeks or so had passed when a four-wheeled cab drew up at the door of 2 Albert Court, London, E.C. The progress of this vehicle had excited some remark among the more youthful and lighter-minded denizens of the city, for on its box, arrayed in an ill-fitting suit of dittos and a brown hat some sizes too small for him, sat a most strange object, whose coal-black countenance, dwarfed frame, and enormous nose and shoulders attracted their ribald observance. "Look at him, Bill," said one youth to an acquaintance. "He's escaped from Madame Tussaud's, he has, painted himself over with Dan Martin's best, and bought a second-hand Guy Fawkes nose." Just then his remarks were cut short, for Otter, having been made to understand by the driver that they had arrived at their destination, descended from the box in a manner so original that it is probably peculiar to the aborigines of Central Africa, and frightened that boy away. From the cab emerged Leonard and Juanna, looking very much the better for their sea journey. Indeed, having recovered her health and spirits, and being very neatly dressed in a grey frock, with a wide black hat trimmed with ostrich feathers, Juanna looked what she was, a very lovely woman. Entering an outer office, Leonard asked if Messrs. Thomson and Turner were to be seen. "Mr. Turner is within, sir," answered a clerk of venerable appearance. "Mr. Thomson—" Here his glance fell upon Otter, and suddenly he froze up, then added with a jerk, "has been dead 100 years. Thomson, sir," he explained, recovering his dignity, but with his eyes still fixed on Otter, "was the founder of this firm. He died in the time of George III. That's his picture over the door, the person with a hare lip and a snuff-box." "Indeed," said Leonard. "As Mr. Thomson is not available, perhaps you will tell Mr. Turner that a gentleman would like to speak to him." "Certainly, sir," said the old clerk, still staring fixedly at Otter, whose aspect appeared to fascinate him as much as that worthy had been fascinated by the eyes of the water dweller. "Have you an appointment, sir?" "No," answered Leonard. "Tell him that it is in reference to an advertisement which his firm inserted in the Times some months ago." The clerk started, wondering if this could be the missing Mr. Outram, that much sought-for individual was understood to have resided in Africa, which is the home of dwarfs and other oddities. Once more he stared at Otter and vanished through a swing door. Presently he returned. "Mr. Turner will see you, sir. If you and the lady will please step in. Does this gentleman wish to accompany you?" "No," said Leonard. "He can stop here." Thereupon the clerk handed Otter a tall stool, on which the dwarf perched himself disconsolately. Then he opened the swing door and ushered Leonard and his wife into Mr. Turner's private room. "Whom have I the pleasure of addressing?" said a bland, stout gentleman, rising from before a table strewn with papers. "Pray be seated, madam." Leonard drew from his pocket a copy of the Weekly Times and handed it to him, saying: "I understand that you inserted this advertisement." "Certainly we did," answered the lawyer, after glancing at it. "Do you bring me any news of Mr. Leonard Outram?" "Yes, I do. I am he, and this lady is my wife." The lawyer bowed politely. "This is most fortunate," he said. "We had almost given up hope, but of course some proofs of identity will be required." "I think that they can be furnished to your satisfaction," answered Leonard briefly. "Meanwhile, for the sake of argument, perhaps you will assume that I am the person whom I state myself to be, and inform me to what this advertisement refers." "Certainly," answered the lawyer. "There can be no harm in that. Sir Thomas Outram, the late baronet, as you are doubtless aware, had two sons, Thomas and Leonard. Leonard, the second son, as a young man, was engaged to, or rather had some love entanglement with a lady, really I forget her maiden name, but perhaps you can inform me of it." "Do you happen to mean Miss Jane Beach?" said Leonard quietly. At this point Juanna turned in her chair and became extraordinarily, indeed almost fiercely, interested in the conversation. "Quite so. Beach was the name. You must excuse my forgetfulness. Well, Sir Thomas's affairs fell into confusion, and after their father's death, Mr. Leonard Outram, with his elder brother Thomas, emigrated to South Africa. In that same year Miss Jane Beach married a client of ours, Mr. Cohen, whose father had purchased the estate of Outram from the trustees in bankruptcy." "Indeed," said Leonard. "Shortly afterwards," went on the lawyer, "Mr. Cohen, or rather Sir Jonas Cohen, succeeded to the estate on the death of his father. 2 years ago he died, leaving all his property, real and personal, to his only child, a daughter named Jane, with reversion to his widow in fee simple. Within a month of his death the child Jane also died, and 9 months later her mother, Lady Cohen, née Jane Beach, followed her to the grave." "Yes," said Leonard in a dull voice, and hiding his face in his hand. "Go on, sir." "Lady Cohen made a somewhat peculiar will. Under the terms of that will she bequeaths the mansion house and estates of Outram, together with most of her personal property, amounting in all to something over £100,000, to her old friend Leonard Outram and the heirs of his body, with reversion to her brother. This will has not been disputed, therefore, if you are Leonard Outram, I may congratulate you upon being once more the owner of your ancestral estates and a considerable fortune in cash." For a while Leonard was too agitated to speak. "I will prove to you," he said at last, "that I am this person, that is, I will prove it prima facie. Afterwards you can satisfy yourself of the truth of my statements by the usual methods." And he proceeded to adduce a variety of evidence as to his identity, which need not be set out here. The lawyer listened in silence, taking a note from time to time. "I think," he said, when Leonard had finished, "that, subject to those inquiries of which you yourself have pointed out the necessity in so grave a matter, I may accept it as proved that you are none other than Mr. Leonard Outram, or rather," he added, correcting himself, "if, as I understand, Your elder brother Thomas is dead, then Sir Leonard Outram. Indeed, you have so entirely convinced me that this is the case, that I have no hesitation in placing in your hands a letter addressed to you by the late Lady Cohen, and deposited with me together with the executed will, though, when you have read it, I shall request you to leave that letter with me for the present. By the way, it may interest you to learn," Mr. Turner added, as he went to a safe built into the wall and unlocked its iron door, "that we have been hunting for you for a year or more. We even sent a man to Africa, and he tracked you to a spot in some mountains somewhere north of Delagoa Bay, where it was reported that you, with your brother Thomas and 2 friends, were digging for gold. He reached the spot on the night of the 9th of May last year." "The very day that I left it," broke in Leonard. "And found the site of your camp and 3 graves. At first our representative thought that you were all dead, but afterwards he fell in with a native who appears to have deserted from your service, and who told him that one of the brothers was dying when he left the camp, but one was still in good health, though he did not know where he had gone." "My brother Thomas died on the 1st of May that year," said Leonard. "After that all trace of you was lost, but I still kept on advertising, for missing people have a wonderful way of turning up to claim fortunes, and as you see the result. Here is the letter, Sir Leonard." Leonard took the document and looked at it, while strange feelings crowded into his mind. This was the first letter that he had ever received from Jane Beach. Also it was the last that he ever could receive. "Before I open this, Mr. Turner," he said, "for my own satisfaction, I may as well ask you to compare the handwriting of the address with another specimen of it that chances to be in my possession." And producing the worn prayer book from his pocket, Jane's parting gift, he opened it at the fly-leaf and pointed out the inscription to the lawyer, placing the envelope beside it. Mr. Turner took a reading glass and examined first one writing and then the other. "These words appear to have been written by the same hand," he said presently. "Lady Cohen's writing was peculiar, and it is difficult to be mistaken on the point, though I am no expert. To free you from responsibility, with your consent, I myself will open this letter," and he slit the envelope at the top with an ivory paper knife, and, drawing out its contents, he handed them to Leonard. They ran thus: "My dearest Leonard, for so I, who am no longer a wife, may call you without shame, seeing that you are in truth the dearest to my heart, whether you be still living or dead, like my husband and my child. This will, which I am to sign to-morrow, will prove to you, if you are yet alive, as I believe to be the case, how deep is my anxiety that you should be re-entered into possession of the ancestral home of which fortune has deprived you. It is with the greatest pleasure that I make you this bequest, and I can do so with a clear conscience, for my late husband has left everything at my absolute disposal, being himself without near relations, in the sad event which has occurred of the death of his daughter, our only child. May you live long enough to enjoy the lands and fortunes which I enabled thus to return to your family, and may your children and their descendants sit at Outram for many a generation to come. And now I will talk no more of this matter, for I have an explanation to make and a pardon to ask. It may well be, Leonard, that when your eyes fall upon these lines, you will have forgotten me, most deservedly, and have found some other woman to love you. No, as I set this down, I feel that it is not true. You will never forget me altogether, Leonard, your first love, and no other woman will ever be quite the same to you as I have been, or at least so I believe in my foolishness and vanity. You will ask what explanation is possible after the way in which I have treated you, and the outrage that I have done to my own love. Such as it is, however, I offer it to you. I was driven into this marriage, Leonard, by my late father, who could be very cruel when he chose. To admit this is, as I know, a proof of weakness. So be it. I have never concealed from myself that I am weak. Yet, believe me, I struggled while I could. I wrote to you even, but they intercepted my letter, and I told all the truth to Mr. Cohen, but he was self-willed and passionate, and would take no heed of my pleading. So I married him, Leonard, and was fairly happy with him, for he was kindness itself to me. But from that hour I began to die. And now more than 6 years have passed since the night of our parting in the snow, and the end is at hand, for I am really dying. It has pleased God to take my little daughter, and this last shock proved more than I can bear. And so I go to join her, and to wait with her till such time as I shall once more see your unforgotten face. That is all I have to say, dear Leonard. Pardon me, and I am selfish enough to add, do not forget me. Jane. P.S. Why is it that an affection like ours, which has never borne fruit even, should in the end prove stronger than any other earthly tie? Heaven knows, and heaven alone, how passionately I loved and love my dead child, and yet, now that my own hour is at hand, it is of you that I think the most, you who are neither child nor husband. I suppose that I shall understand ere long. But oh, Leonard, 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 if, as I believe, my nature is immortal, I swear that such love as mine for you, however much it may be dishonoured and betrayed, is still the most immortal part of it. J. Leonard put down the letter on the table, and again he covered his face with his hands to hide his emotion, for his feelings overcame him as a sense of depth and purity of this dead woman's undying love sank into his heart. "May I read that letter, Leonard?" asked Juanna in a quiet voice. "Yes, I suppose so, dear, if you like," he answered, feeling dully that it was better to make a clean breast of the matter at once, and thus to prevent future misunderstandings. Juanna took the letter and perused it twice, by which time she knew it as well as she did the Lord's Prayer, nor did she ever forget a single word of it. Then she handed it back to the lawyer, saying nothing. "I understand," said Mr. Turner, breaking in on a silence which he felt to be painful, "that you will be able to produce the necessary proofs of identity within the next few days, and then we can get the will proved in the usual form. Meanwhile you must want money, which I will take the risk of advancing you." He wrote a cheque for £100 and gave it to Leonard. Half an hour later, Leonard and Juanna were alone in a room at their hotel, but as yet scarcely a word had passed between them since they left the lawyer's office. "Don't you see, Leonard," his wife said almost fiercely, "it is most amusing. You made a mistake. Your brother's dying prophecy was like a Delphic oracle. It could be taken two ways, and of course you adopted the wrong interpretation. You left Grave Mountain a day too soon. It was by Jane Beach's help that you were to recover Outram, not by mine," and she laughed sadly. "Don't talk like that, dear," said Leonard in a sad voice. "It pains me." "How else am I to talk after reading that letter?" she answered. "For what woman can hold her own against a dead rival? Now, also, I must be indebted to her bounty all my days. Oh, if I had not lost those jewels! If only I had not lost those jewels!" History does not relate how Leonard dealt with this unexpected and yet natural situation. A week had passed, and Leonard, with Juanna at his side, found himself once more in the great hall at Outram, where on a bygone night, many years ago, he and his dead brother had sworn their oath. All was the same, for in this hall nothing had been changed. Jane had seen to that. There, chained to its stand, was the Bible, upon which they had registered their vow. There were the pictures of his ancestors gazing down calmly upon him, as though they cared little for the story of his struggles and of his strange triumph over fortune, by the help of a woman. There was the painted window, and its blazoned coat of arms, and its proud mottos, for heart, home, and honor, and per ardua ad astra. He had won the heart and home, and he had kept his honor and his oath. He had endured the toils and dangers, and the crown of stars was his. And yet, was Leonard altogether happy as he stood looking on these familiar things? Perhaps not quite, for yonder in the churchyard there was a grave, and within the church a monument in white marble that was wonderfully like one who had loved him and whom he had loved, though time and trouble had written a strange difference on her face. Also, he had failed. He had kept his oath indeed, and fought on till the end was won, but he himself had not won it. What now was his had once belonged to a successful rival, who doubtless little dreamed of the payment that would be exacted from him by the decree of fate. And was Juanna happy? She knew well that Leonard loved her truly, but oh, it was cruel that she who had shared the struggles should be deprived of her reward, that it should be left to another who, if not false, had at least been weak, to give to her husband that which she had striven so hard to win, that which she had won and lost. And harder still was it that in this ancient place, which would henceforth be her home, by day and by night, she must feel the presence of the shadow of a woman sweet and pale, who, as she believed, stood between her and that which she desired above all things, the complete and absolute possession of her husband's heart. Doubtless she overrated the trouble. Men and women do not spend their lives in brooding upon the memories of their first loves. If they did, this would be a melancholy world, but to Juanna it was real enough, and remained so for some years. And if a thing is true to the heart, it avails little that reason should give it the lie. In short, now in the hour of their full property, Leonard and Juanna were making acquaintance with the fact that fortune never gives with both hands, as the French say, but loves to rob with one while she bestows with the other. Too few is it allowed to be completely miserable, but none to be completely happy. Their good luck had been so overwhelming in many ways that it would have partaken of the unnatural, and might well have excited their fears for the future, had its completeness been unmarred by these drawbacks which, such as they were, probably they learned to disremember as the years passed over them, bringing them new trials and added blessings. Perhaps a peep into the future will tell us the rest of the story of Leonard and Juanna Outram better and more truly than any further chronicling of events. 10 years or so have gone by, and Sir Leonard, now a member of Parliament and the Lord Lieutenant of his county, comes out of church on the first Sunday in May, accompanied by his wife, the stateliest matron in the countryside, and some 3 or 4 children, boys and girls together, as healthy as they are handsome. After a glance at a certain grave that lies near to the chancel door, they walk homewards across the budding park in the sweet spring afternoon, till 100 yards or more from the door of Outram Hall they pause at the gates of a dwelling known as the corral, shaped like a beehive, fashioned of straw and sticks, and built by the hands of Otter alone. Basking in the sunshine in front of this hut sits the dwarf himself, cutting broomsticks with a knife out of the straightest of a bundle of ash saplings that lie beside him. He is dressed in a queer mixture of native and European costume, but otherwise time has wrought no change in him. "Greeting, boss," he says as Leonard comes up. "Is Boss Wallace here yet?" No, he will be down in time for dinner. Mind that you are there to wait, Otter." "I shall not be late, Boss, on this day of all days." "Otter," cries a little maid, "you should not make broomsticks on Sunday. It is very wrong." The dwarf grins by way of answer, then speaks to Leonard in a tongue that none but he can understand. "What did I tell you many years ago, Boss?" he says. "Did I not tell you by this way or by that you should win the wealth, and that the great kraal across the water should be yours again, and that the children of strangers should wander there no more? See, it has come true," and he points to the happy group of youngsters. "Wow! I, Otter, who am a fool in most things, have proved to be the best of prophets. Yet I will rest content and prophesy no more, lest I should lose my name for wisdom." A few hours later, and dinner is over in the larger hall. All servants have gone except Otter, who, dressed in a white smock, stands behind his master's chair. There is no company present save Mr. Wallace, who has just returned from another African expedition, and sits smiling and observant, his eyeglass fixed in his eye as of yore. Juanna is arrayed in full evening dress, however, and a great star ruby blazes upon her breast. "Why have you got the red stone on tonight, mother?" asks her eldest son, Thomas, who with his two sisters has come down to dessert. "Hush, dear," she answers, as Otter advances to that stand on which the Bible is chained, holding a glass filled with port in his hand. "Deliverer and shepherdess," he says, speaking in Sesotho, "on this day 11 years ago, Boss Tom died out yonder. I, who drink wine but once a year, drink to the memory of Boss Tom, and to our happy meeting with him in the gold house of the Great Great." And swallowing the port with a single gulp, Otter throws the glass behind him, shattering it on the floor. "Amen," says Leonard. "Now, love, your toast." "I drink to the memory of Francisco, who died to save me," says Juanna in a low voice. "Amen," repeats her husband. For a moment there is silence, for Leonard gives no toast. Then the boy Thomas lifts his glass and cries: "And I drink to Olfan, the king of the people of the mist, and to Otter, who killed the snake god, and whom I love the best of all of them. Mother, may Otter get the spear and rope, and tell us the story of how he dragged you and father up the ice bridge." End of Envoy. Recording by Richard Kilmer, Rio Medina, Texas. End of The People of the Mist by H. Rider Haggard.